They called her a gold digger before they even learned her name. They said it like it was a fact, like it was a warning, like it was entertainment. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you're here for stories about dignity, fairness, and real accountability, tap like, subscribe, and let's get into it. Zuri Mensah stood in the foyer of the Harrow estate with her hands folded low, fingers laced tight to stop them trembling. The house was quiet in that rich person way. No laughter, no clutter, just polished silence and funeral flowers that smelled like money. A pair of double doors stood open ahead of her. Beyond them, a formal sitting room with walls covered in portraits that looked down like judges, men in suits, women in pearls, smiles frozen in paint like approval had been carved into their faces. Zuri wasn't ready for any of this, not the house, not the cameras outside, not the way her husband's family looked at her like she'd tracked dirt onto their marble. She had loved Gideon Harrow in a way that felt impossible on paper. Billionaire founder, public figure, the man whose name made boardrooms go quiet, and her, a woman who used to sleep outside a closed shop on Briar Street because the light above the sign worked and the security camera pointed at the pavement. It made her feel slightly less like she could disappear without anyone noticing. The door behind her clicked. Soft footsteps. Then a voice, smooth as chilled glass. Zuri. She turned. Marianne Harrow, Gideon's mother, stepped into the foyer in black silk and pearls, grief wrapped around her like armor she'd had tailored. Beside her stood Kellen Harrow, Gideon's younger brother, suit crisp, expression careless. And behind them, Gideon's sister Tamsin held her phone loosely, thumb poised like she was waiting for Zuri to give her a clip. Marianne's eyes traveled over Zuri's dress, then landed on the wedding ring still on her finger. That ring had become a target. "I assume you understand," Marianne said, "that today is procedural." Zuri nodded once. "Yes," Kellen smiled. "Procedural. That's a nice word for it." Tamsin's laugh was small and mean. "Don't act confused, Zuri. We're here to handle Gideon's affairs." Zuri swallowed. "I'm his wife." Kellen's eyes flicked over her like she was a stain. "You were his wife. Let's not pretend that's the same thing." Marianne stepped closer until Zuri could smell her perfume, expensive, cold, and too controlled to be comforting. "My son was generous," Marianne said, "and he had a weakness for projects." Project. The word hit Zuri's ribs like a shove. Her throat tightened. She forced her voice steady. "Gideon wasn't weak." Marianne's eyes hardened. "We will see." A lawyer arrived a minute later, calm and polished, briefcase in hand like he carried the truth in compartments. He introduced himself as Andre Whitfield. His voice was professional, but his eyes were careful, like he'd already taken the measure of the room. They moved into the sitting room. Zuri walked last, because that's how it always is when people decide you don't belong. Even when the doors are open, you can still feel the judgment behind you. They sat around a long table that looked like it was built for intimidation. Andre laid out documents. Marianne folded her hands. "Let's finish this." Kellen leaned back. "I wanted on record we advised Gideon against this marriage." Tamsin jumped in. He wasn't himself. He was grieving. He was vulnerable. Zuri lifted her gaze. "He was clear when he chose me." Kellen smirked. "Sure he was." Andre cleared his throat. "We are here to read Gideon Harrow's will and associated trust documents. There's also a sealed appendix, released only if specific conditions are met." Marianne's posture shifted. "Appendix?" Andre nodded. "Yes." Kellen's smile widened, then sharpened. "Let's read the will." Andre began. At first, it was small things. Art to the foundation, donations to hospitals, personal effects. Marianne relaxed in tiny increments, like she expected the important parts to land back in her hands. Then, Andre read the line that changed the oxygen in the room. "I leave Harrow Aeronautics Holdings, including controlling voting shares, to my wife, Zuri Mensah Harrow, effective immediately." Silence. Not the quiet kind, the dangerous kind. Kellen's chair scraped as he shot up. No, absolutely not. Tamsin's face flushed. That's insane. Marianne didn't move, but her voice dropped low. Read that again. Andre did, slowly. Zuri felt the room tilt. She hadn't expected kindness today, but she hadn't expected this either. For a second, she didn't even hear the words as inheritance. She heard them as Gideon's voice, steady and stubborn, saying, I chose you. I see you. I will not let them erase you. Kellen pointed at Andre like anger could rewrite ink. He would never do that unless she pushed him. Zuri's voice came out smaller than she wanted. I didn't push Gideon into anything. Tamsin snapped. You crawled into his life at the perfect moment. Zuri flinched just once. Marianne's eyes stayed on Andre. There's a condition. Andre nodded. Yes. Kellen exhaled like he'd been waiting for a trap door. There it is. Andre read on. The transfer is contingent on the Gideon-Harrow Legacy Covenant. A minimum of 12% of annual net profits will fund 2 programs for 10 years. Scholarships for first-generation students in engineering and aviation sciences, prioritizing underserved communities, and a transitional shelter for women and children facing housing insecurity. The shelter will be established in Atlanta, Georgia, on or near Briar Street. Zuri's breath caught. Briar Street. The closed shop. Kellen laughed sharp. So that's the game. He leaves her everything as long as she plays philanthropist. Tamsin sneered. A shelter. Convenient. Marianne finally looked at Zuri, eyes like blades. Did you ask him to do that? Zuri shook her head slowly. No, Andre continued. If the covenant is not upheld, controlling shares revert to the Harrow Foundation under the stewardship of Mrs. Marianne Harrow and Gideon's siblings. Kellen's smile returned, satisfied. Tamsin sat back, pleased. Marianne's chin lifted like she'd just regained control. Then Andre added, there is also a sealed appendix. It is released if the will is challenged, if Zuri is coerced to surrender control, or if she is publicly defamed in connection with Gideon's death or this marriage. Kellen's smile vanished. Tamsin's phone slipped slightly in her hand. Marianne's face tightened. Why would Gideon? Andre's expression didn't change. Mr. Harrow anticipated this meeting. Zuri felt cold move under her skin. Marianne's voice turned quiet and dangerous. We are protecting our family. Zuri heard herself ask, soft but firm. From what? Marianne turned her head slowly as if Zuri had broken a rule just by speaking. From you, Marianne said. And right then, with the portraits watching and the flowers suffocating the air, Zuri realized something clean and brutal. They weren't grieving Gideon. They were grieving control. They were grieving the idea that a woman like her could sit where they sat. That afternoon, the headlines arrived like vultures. Former homeless woman inherits billionaire's empire. Gold digger or grieving widow. Zuri didn't read the comments at first, but the comments found her anyway. In the tone of a bank clerk who suddenly spoke slower, like Zuri might not understand the word account. In the stare of a woman in a designer coat who looked Zuri up and down and smirked like she'd solved a puzzle. In the way a man at a gas station nodded toward her car and said, nice upgrade, like grief had been a lottery win. And it wasn't just class. It had edges. The kind of edges that show up when a black woman is in a place people have mentally reserved for someone else. The Harrows didn't stay quiet either. Kellen went on a finance podcast and said Gideon was manipulated. He smiled while he said it, like it hurt him to say it, but he had to, like he was a good man forced into a hard truth. Tamsin posted a childhood photo of Gideon, captioned with something vague about protecting his legacy, which somehow painted Zuri as a threat without using a single direct accusation. Marianne gave a refined statement about grief and concerns, her eyes glossy for the cameras, her words carefully chosen to land like poison without leaving fingerprints. Zuri watched it late at night from Gideon's study, sitting in his chair, surrounded by his books and the faint smell of his cologne. She kept thinking about the first time she saw Gideon in person, not on a billboard, not in a magazine, not on a screen, in person, on Briar Street. She didn't know it was him, not then. Back then she didn't have the mental space for celebrity faces. She had a list in her head. Stay dry, stay safe, find food, avoid trouble, survive the night. It had been a rainy evening, the kind where the cold sinks straight through fabric and makes your bones feel older than you are. Zuri had pulled her hoodie tighter and sat under the awning of the closed shop. A flattened cardboard box was her barrier against the wet ground. A plastic bag over her socks was her attempt at dignity. Cars passed like they had somewhere to be. Then a black SUV rolled to a stop across the street, not in front of the shop, but close enough that its headlights cut through the rain. A man stepped out, suit jacket open, tie loosened, shoulders tense like he was carrying something heavy inside his chest. A driver hovered near the door, speaking softly into a phone. The man's hands were shaking. Zuri watched because her body had learned to watch. People shaking like that usually meant one of two things. They were about to break down or they were about to do something reckless. The man leaned against the vehicle and pressed his palm to his forehead. Zuri stood up before she could talk herself out of it. She crossed the street, careful, heart beating fast because approaching strangers at night is never simple when you have nowhere to go back to. "Sir," she said, "you all right?" He looked up, eyes unfocused for a second, then sharpened as they landed on her. "I'm fine," he said immediately, a lie that sounded like a reflex. Zuri glanced at the driver. "He needs to sit. He needs water." The driver looked relieved, like someone else had just taken the steering wheel. "We're trying to get him to the hospital," the driver said. The man's jaw tightened. "No hospital." Zuri noticed his breathing. Too fast, too shallow, panic. She had seen it in shelters, in people who were strong until their bodies finally refused. "Look at me," Zuri said, soft but firm. "Not the lights, not the road, just me." His eyes locked onto hers, almost angry. "Breathe in," she said, "slow, count with me." He inhaled, shaky. "Hold," she said. Then, breathe out, long. His shoulders dropped a fraction, again. Rain hit the pavement like static. His breath steadied. The driver stared at Zuri like she was doing something supernatural. The man swallowed. "How did you—" Zuri shrugged. "People think panic is weakness. It isn't. It's your body trying to protect you the wrong way." He stared at her for a long moment. Then his gaze drifted to the cardboard under the awning and the bin bag near Zuri's feet. His face changed. Not pity exactly, more like shame. He reached into his pocket like he was about to pull out money. Zuri held up a hand. "Don't." He paused. "Don't what?" "Don't do the pity thing," she said. "If you want to help, help. If you don't, keep it moving. But don't do that face." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, surprise, maybe relief. "What's your name?" he asked. Zuri hesitated. Names can be dangerous when you're trying to stay invisible, but something about his voice felt human. "Zuri," she said. He repeated it like it mattered. "Zuri." Then he nodded once like he was locking it into memory. "Thank you." Zuri stepped back. "Go home, drink water, eat something, call a doctor in the morning." The driver opened the door quickly. The man started to get in, then stopped. "Wait," he said. Zuri paused. He looked at her carefully. "If I wanted to repay you properly, what would you ask for?" Zuri's voice stayed flat. "I'd ask you to remember I'm a person." He blinked. She nodded toward the awning. "That's enough." And she walked back to her cardboard, not looking over her shoulder. Because sometimes looking back gives people the wrong idea. She didn't know that man would become her husband. She didn't know that one moment of breathing would become 10 years of consequences. Back in the study, Zuri stared at Gideon's photo on the desk. He had taken it on a day they didn't look polished. They were both laughing at something stupid, her hair wrapped, his sleeves rolled up. He had loved her like she was allowed to exist loudly. And now he was gone. She could still hear his voice in her memory, not loud, just steady. "Promise me something," Gideon had said once, standing in the kitchen while she washed dishes. "What?" "If anything happens to me," he'd said, "don't let them turn you into a villain just because you survived." Zuri had tried to laugh it off then. Now she whispered into the empty room, "Promise." 2 weeks later, Zuri walked into her first board meeting. Navy suit, hair pulled back, shoulders squared, not because she wasn't afraid, because fear was not new. This was just fear wearing better furniture. The boardroom at Harrow Aeronautics was a glass box in the sky. The city looked small below it, like all the noise of life had been reduced to a quiet hum. At the far end of the room, Kellen sat in a seat he didn't officially own, wearing confidence like cologne. Several board members stood when Zuri entered, some from respect, some because they weren't sure what the rules were now. A man with silver hair introduced himself as Mason Rourke, the interim chair. His handshake was firm, his smile careful. "Mrs. Harrow," he said, "we are sorry for your loss." Zuri nodded. "Thank you." She took Gideon's seat at the head of the table, and the chair felt too big for the first few seconds, like it was testing whether she belonged. Kellen smiled. "You look expensive." Zuri's voice stayed even. "Thank you." Kellen leaned forward. "Here's the deal. You're out of your depth. Step aside, take the settlement my mother offered, and we'll make this painless." Zuri looked at him properly, calm. "I'm not selling Gideon's promise back to the people who want to erase it." Kellen chuckled, but his eyes sharpened. "You think you're moral. You're just lucky." Zuri held his gaze. "I'm not lucky. I'm stubborn." A few people shifted. A few looked down. Mason Rourke cleared his throat. "We are here to discuss continuity, investor confidence, operational stability." Zuri nodded. "Good. Let's talk about the covenant, too." There it was, the word that made some people stiffen. One board member, a woman named Leona Park, adjusted her glasses. 12% is significant." Zuri didn't flinch. "So is what Gideon asked for. We will honor it." Another board member, Everett Cole, an older black man with a calm face, looked at Zuri for the first time like he was actually seeing her, not as a headline, as a decision maker. Kellen spread his hands. "This is exactly why you can't run this. You're emotional. You're making social projects more important than shareholder value." Zuri's voice stayed low. "You think feeding people is emotional?" Kellen's smile tightened. "I think you're trying to play savior to justify stealing." The room went quiet. Zuri felt heat rise in her chest, but she controlled it. "Say it with your full chest," she said. "You think I stole Gideon's life." Kellen didn't answer directly. He didn't have to. His face said it. Zuri turned to Mason Rourke. "We are going to stabilize the company, and we are going to fulfill the covenant. If anyone is here to help, welcome. If anyone is here to sabotage, I'll see them in court." Everett Cole's mouth twitched like he wanted to smile. Leona Park watched Zuri with new interest. Kellen leaned back, eyes narrowed. "You won't last." Zuri didn't blink. "Watch me." That night, Zuri found Gideon's note tucked inside a book in his study. Not an official letter, not a grand statement, just a folded page written in the messy handwriting she knew from the sticky notes he left in the kitchen. "If you're reading this," they started early, "they will call you a gold digger, a thief, a mistake. Do not let them distract you. Briar Street is the point. Check the second drawer of my desk, the one that sticks." Zuri opened the drawer. It resisted for a second, then gave way like it was reluctant to hand over what it held. Inside was a small key taped to a bank slip, safety deposit box, and one last line. "If they force your hand, open the appendix." Zuri sat back in Gideon's chair, heart pounding. Gideon had known. He had planned for her survival like it was a certainty. And if you're listening right now, I want you to comment this. Would you play nice for peace, or would you fight for proof? Comment peace or proof. I want to see what kind of people are in here. The next day, Zuri drove to Briar Street. She parked across the road and stared at the closed shop. Paint peeling, sign faded, awning sagging slightly. For a moment she could almost feel the cardboard under her hips again, the cold creeping in through her clothes, the hunger that made the world feel distant. She got out of the car, walked to the front of the shop, and touched the concrete with 2 fingers like she was greeting an old life. "This is the point," she whispered, and she made a decision right there. She would not just comply with Gideon's covenant, she would own it. She would make it impossible for anyone to claim it was charity for show. She would turn Briar Street into proof. Marianne invited Zuri to lunch at the foundation a few days later. It was framed as peace. It felt like a trap. Marianne sat by a window, sunlight on her pearls, the kind of light that made her look softer than she was. "We can solve this elegantly," Marianne said, sliding a folder across the table. "You step away from control. You keep a generous settlement. You live comfortably." Zuri didn't touch the folder. "And the covenant?" "The foundation will handle it." Zuri's voice stayed calm. "So you want me to disappear, and you want to wear Gideon's promise like jewelry." Marianne's smile thinned. "Don't be dramatic," Zuri met her gaze. "You called me a project on the day you buried your son." Marianne's eyes flashed. "Be careful. The world loves a fallen woman." Zuri stood. "Then it's a good thing I learned to stand up while I was still on the ground." On the drive home, unknown messages hit her phone. "Take the money and disappear. Gideon's gone. Nobody will protect you now. Stop acting moral. You would have taken anything." Zuri's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She pulled over, stared at the screen, and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear. A decision. Then she did something Gideon would have respected. She took screenshots. She emailed them to Andre Whitfield. Subject line, threats. 2 days later, Kellen filed a legal challenge to the will, undue influence, competency, manipulation. The minute Zuri read it, she remembered the clause. If the will is challenged, the appendix is released. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just about money now. It was about truth Gideon had sealed away like a weapon he hoped she'd never have to pick up. Andre met Zuri in his office that night. The walls were lined with casebooks, and everything smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Andre's voice was steady. "They're going to try to bury you in narrative," Zuri nodded. "I know." He slid a folder toward her. "The will is strong, but they'll weaponize perception." Zuri leaned forward. "Then we weaponize facts." Andre studied her for a moment. "Gideon chose well." Zuri's throat tightened at the sound of his name. Andre continued. "If we trigger the appendix, it goes public in court record. Are you ready for that?" Zuri stared at the folder, then looked up. "I don't want revenge." Andre nodded. "Good." Zuri's voice lowered. "I want breathing room. For me. For people like me." Andre's eyes softened. "Then we do this properly." The bank room was cold and bright. The safety deposit box clicked open with a sound too small for what it held. Inside were documents, neatly organized, a flash drive, and a sealed envelope with Gideon's handwriting, for Zuri, only if needed. She opened it with shaking hands. Zuri. If you are reading this, they did exactly what I expected. The appendix is not vengeance. It is truth. Use it only if you have to, but if you do not hesitate. They've hurt people for years and called it business. If you release it, they'll call you bitter, calculating, ungrateful. Let them. Your job is not to be liked. Your job is to be free. Keep your promise. Briar Street. I love you. Gideon. Zuri pressed the letter to her chest for a second, then set it down and opened the file. The appendix was thick. Receipts, settlements, internal emails, a list of incidents that made her stomach twist, a factory accident quietly paid off, a whistleblower silenced, a scholarship applicant rejected after reporting harassment, a private investigator hired to manage reputational threats, and then a page that froze her blood. Briar Street, property acquisition plans, eviction notices, zoning complaints filed through shell companies that traced back, slowly but clearly, to Harrow-linked entities. They had been obstructing shelters in that area for years, not by shouting, by paperwork, by concerned citizens, by community standards, by polite meetings where the word safety was used as a weapon. Zuri sat down hard. So that was it. They didn't just hate her. They hated what she represented. A woman from the pavement holding a mirror up to their legacy. Court day came fast, cameras outside, cold marble inside. The Harrow family arrived like a unit. Kellen in front, confident. Marianne behind him, composed. Grief turned into strategy. Tamsin a little to the side, phone away now, face carefully neutral. Zuri walked in with Andre, and a second attorney Andre had brought in for this, Simone Drayton, a sharp woman with a voice that could cut through noise without raising volume. Kellen's lawyer painted Zuri as opportunistic, a woman with a past, a woman who latched onto a grieving man. He spoke about vulnerability, like Gideon was a confused child instead of an adult who ran an empire. He hinted at isolation, like marriage itself was a form of kidnapping. And in between the words, there were other messages. She wasn't from their world. She didn't deserve it. She must have tricked him. Zuri stayed still. She let the lies spend themselves. Then Simone stood. Her voice was calm. "We are not here to argue with headlines." She slid documents to the judge. "We are here to argue with evidence. Marriage records, medical evaluations, emails showing Gideon's intent, witness statements from staff who saw Gideon lucid and deliberate." Then Simone said the line that changed everything. "Your Honor, the will challenge triggers the release of the sealed appendix. We request it be entered into record." Kellen's head snapped up. "No." Marianne's face tightened. The judge reviewed the clause, then looked over his glasses. "Overruled. The appendix will be entered." You could hear the room breathe. The appendix didn't land like a movie twist. It landed like an audit, page after page of truth. The judge read portions into record. Kellen's face drained. Marianne's hands tightened around her bag. Tamsin stared at the table like it might swallow her. A harassment report was referenced next, handled with settlements and silence. Zuri felt her throat tighten, because harm looks ordinary when powerful people repeat it for long enough. Then Briar Street came up. The judge's brow furrowed at the shell companies, the signatures, the timing. Simone spoke quietly. "Your Honor, the Covenant's shelter location was not random. Mr. Harrow chose it. There is documented obstruction by Harrow-linked entities. This speaks directly to motive and intimidation." The judge turned to Kellen. "Has Mrs. Harrow received threats?" Andre submitted the screenshots. The judge's gaze hardened. In that moment, Kellen looked like a man realizing his family name didn't work like a key in every lock. During recess, the hallway buzzed with reporters. Zuri walked straight, chin lifted. Then a woman stepped forward, nervous, clutching a folder. "Mrs. Harrow," the woman said softly. Zuri turned. The woman's eyes were tired but steady. "My name is Corinne. I'm in those documents." Zuri's breath caught. "You came," Corinne nodded, voice shaking. "I thought I was alone. I thought nobody believed me." Zuri's voice softened. "You weren't alone. You were silenced." Corinne swallowed hard. "People will hate you for this." Zuri gave a small, sad smile. "They already do." Corinne hesitated. "If you need me to testify, I will." Zuri touched her arm gently. "I won't waste your courage." When court resumed, the air had changed. It wasn't just Zuri versus the Harrows anymore. It was Zuri holding a door open and the truth walking through behind her. After court, the headlines changed. Not everyone defended Zuri, but the jokes quieted. Investigations started. Questions got asked that money couldn't instantly erase. Kellen tried to pivot with statements about isolated incidents. Marianne announced a review. Tamsin went silent, but truth had already escaped the box. That night, Zuri went home to a house that still felt like Gideon's breath was trapped in the walls. She found his watch on the dresser and held it. "You planned all this," she whispered. "Did you plan for me to miss you like this?" She cried quietly. Then she got up the next morning and went to work. Because grief doesn't cancel a promise, Zuri hired a team for Briar Street, not for optics, for results. A housing specialist named Keisha Bowman, who knew permits and zoning like a second language, and who had survived the system enough to know where it tries to trap you. A shelter director named Mara Santiago, who cared about safety, not headlines, and who had run a small women's center for years on donation money and stubborn faith. A community organizer named Quincy Reed, who had earned trust in rooms where rich people never sit, and who spoke to people like they mattered. They met in a small office near Briar Street with folding chairs and cheap coffee. Zuri placed a photo of the closed shop on the table. "This is where we build," she said. Quincy nodded. "They'll resist." Zuri nodded back. "I know," Mara asked. "Why here?" Zuri held the photo, then said the truth. "Because this is where I slept, and this is where Gideon first saw me as human." Silence. Then Mara nodded once. "All right. Then we build it right." Keisha tapped the table. "We need a timeline. Investors will watch this. The city will slow walk you." Zuri said. "Then we speed up where we can, and we document everything." Quincy leaned back. "You're going to get people who love the idea of a shelter until it's near them." Zuri nodded. "Then we talk to them. We don't hide." Mara looked at Zuri carefully. "You sure you want to be the face of this?" Zuri's voice was quiet. "They already made me a face. I might as well be a face that tells the truth." The scholarship fund launched first because it moved faster. Applications flooded in, first-generation students, kids who worked shifts and studied in cars. Young women told engineering wasn't for them. Young men with calloused hands and bright minds. Zuri read essays late at night and cried, not from pity, but from recognition. One essay from a teenager in Detroit said, "I fix things because it's the only way I can feel in control." Another from a girl in Atlanta said, "My mom says planes are for people who never had to count coins. I want to be the person who builds them anyway." Zuri closed that one and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Because that was what Gideon meant, not a press release, a life. Then the shelter hit resistance, zoning complaints, anonymous objections, officials suddenly concerned about property values. A neighborhood group formed overnight with a name like Briar Street Community Safety Alliance, and their logo looked like it had been designed by someone who had never set foot on Briar Street. They claimed they were worried about crime. They claimed they were worried about schools. They used words like undesirables without saying it. And when Zuri attended the first city meeting, she felt the room's temperature change when she stepped up to the microphone. A few people looked surprised to see a black woman in a tailored suit instead of the stereotype they'd built in their heads. One man muttered, not quietly enough, "Of course she wants it here." Zuri didn't react. She waited for her time, then spoke. "This shelter is not a threat to your families," she said. "It's protection for families who already exist, families who are already in your city, families who already serve your food, clean your offices, look after your children, and go home to uncertainty." A woman in the front row shook her head. "We don't want that near us." Zuri looked at her. "You mean you don't want to see it?" The room murmured. Keisha squeezed Zuri's elbow lightly as Zuri sat back down, a silent reminder. Stay calm, stay sharp. After the meeting, Quincy whispered, "They're used to suffering being quiet." Zuri nodded. "Then we make it visible." Her team traced the objections back. Shell companies again. Old habits, old power. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. The same legal fingerprints that had buried past incidents were now trying to bury this shelter. Zuri stared at the evidence and felt anger settle in her bones. Then she remembered Gideon's line. "Your job is not to be liked. Your job is to be free." So she did what they didn't expect. She showed up publicly. Not with speeches that sounded like PR, with community meetings in church halls, with listening, with receipts. At one meeting, a mother stood up, voice trembling. I slept in my car with my baby last winter. You know what that does to you? You know what it does to your mind? Zuri's throat tightened. Yes, she said softly. I do. The woman blinked. You? Zuri nodded. I slept outside a closed shop on this street. People walked past me like I was a crack in the pavement. I'm building this so you don't have to beg the world to see you. The room went quiet. Not the judgment kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like people are being given permission to breathe. Afterwards, an older man approached Zuri and said, I didn't trust you. Zuri nodded. That's fair, he swallowed. I still don't trust rich people. Zuri almost smiled. Also fair, he looked at her. But I trust the fact you keep showing up. Zuri nodded once. That's enough. Somewhere in the middle of all that, the Harrows tried another route. They couldn't win in court anymore without more lies, so they tried to win in whispers. A reporter published a piece suggesting Zuri had a secret past and implying criminality without proof. A gossip site posted a photo of Zuri on Briar Street, taken from a distance, captioned like she was performing. Zuri's security found someone had tried to access her email, not successfully, but aggressively. Then, one evening, Zuri came home and found the front gate slightly open. Not wide, just enough to make a point. Her stomach tightened. The security guard apologized, voice tense. We checked the cameras. There's a gap in footage. Zuri froze. A gap? He nodded. 17 minutes, like someone looped the feed. Zuri felt cold spread under her skin. She thought about Gideon's letter. They have hurt people for years and called it business. She called Andre. His voice was calm but sharp. Document everything, tonight, right now. Don't assume it's coincidence. Zuri looked out the window at the dark driveway and whispered, I'm not going anywhere. Andre paused. Zuri, listen to me. You're doing the right thing, but right doesn't always keep you safe. Zuri's voice lowered. Then I'll be careful, but I won't be quiet. Months passed like that. Work, pressure, resistance, progress. One day, a steel beam was delivered to the shelter site with graffiti sprayed across it. Go back. Zuri stood in front of it, jaw tight. Quincy said, We paint over it. Zuri nodded. We do. Mara looked at Zuri. You okay? Zuri exhaled. I'm tired. Mara nodded like she understood deeply. Then we carry it together. The scholarship program grew. The first cohort of students met in person at a modest ceremony. Zuri stood on stage and looked out at faces full of hope and fear, because opportunity can feel like both. She said, People will tell you you're not meant for these rooms. They said that to me too. Let me tell you something. The room doesn't decide your worth. Your work does. Everett Cole attended that ceremony and quietly pulled Zuri aside afterwards. I owe you an apology, he said. Zuri blinked. For what? He looked down. When Gideon married you, I assumed it was a phase. I assumed you'd be pushed out. Zuri's throat tightened. And now? Everett's voice softened. Now I see you're the only person here taking Gideon's promises seriously. Zuri held his gaze. Then help me. Everett nodded. I will. At the next board meeting, Everett backed Zuri openly. Leona Park backed her too. Mason Rourke tried to stay neutral, but the tide was shifting. Kellen showed up late, smirking less these days. He watched Zuri speak about the covenant like she was insulting him by caring. You're spending money like it's yours, he muttered at one point. Zuri looked at him calmly. It is mine, and it is promised. Kellen's eyes narrowed. You think this makes you noble? Zuri's voice stayed steady. No, I think it makes me accountable. Kellen leaned forward. You don't belong here. Zuri met his gaze. You keep saying that like it's a fact. It's just your preference. A few people in the room exhaled like they'd been holding their breath. Kellen leaned back, jaw tight. He didn't have the room anymore. He still had resources, connections, and spite. But the room was slipping away. A year after the first city meeting, after the zoning complaints and the whispers and the attempted sabotage, Briar House opened. No fireworks, no glossy gala, just warmth, transitional shelter, training programs, legal support, child care partnerships, a roof that meant breathing room. The building wasn't perfect. It was real. It smelled like new paint and clean linen. The staff moved quietly, like they understood they were holding people's lives with care. Zuri stood outside on opening day and looked across the street at the closed shop. It was still there, but the boarded windows now wore a mural painted by local artists. Bright colors, a woman's silhouette standing tall. A small phrase at the bottom, not too loud, just true. You are not invisible. A woman approached, holding a little girl's hand. I heard you're the reason this place exists, the woman said carefully. Zuri smiled gently. I'm part of the reason, the woman swallowed. We've been on sofas for months. I was scared to come. Zuri nodded. It's all right. You're here now. The little girl looked up, wide-eyed. Are you rich? Zuri blinked, then smiled. Sometimes I'm just tired. The girl giggled. The woman's eyes filled. Thank you. Zuri's throat tightened. Don't thank me. Use it. Rest, get steady, then when you can, help someone else. Inside, Zuri watched families enter quietly, like they didn't want to break the miracle by moving too loudly. Mara stood beside Zuri and whispered, This is what winning looks like. Zuri's eyes stung. This is what showing up looks like. Meanwhile, the Harrows cracked under scrutiny. Investigations expanded, partners pulled away. Kellen's name appeared in more documents. Marianne's foundation faced audits. And the public, once eager to mock Zuri, asked a different question. What kind of man leaves a sealed appendix unless he's trying to protect someone from his own family? Tamsin tried to rebrand. She posted about healing and moving forward and never once mentioned the people harmed by the silence. Marianne tried to look dignified. She donated money. She made speeches about integrity, but speeches don't erase receipts. 2 years after Gideon's death, Zuri attended a scholarship ceremony. A modest stage, families holding phones, hands shaking with pride. A young man named Darius stepped up. This scholarship means I don't have to choose between feeding my little brothers and finishing school, he said. Applause. He looked at Zuri. They said people like me don't become aerospace engineers, but I'm going to. The room erupted. Afterwards, Darius handed Zuri a folded paper. Inside was a simple drawing of a helicopter above a city skyline. Beneath it he'd written, "Thank you for showing up for people you don't even know." Zuri held it like it weighed something, because it did. That night, Zuri returned to Gideon's study and placed Darius's drawing on the desk beside Gideon's photo. She whispered, "Look, your promise is breathing." A few weeks later, an encrypted email arrived with no name. You should look into Gideon's death report again. Zuri stared at the screen, heart thudding. Gideon's death had been ruled sudden, natural, no scandal, just grief. But Gideon had been careful, meticulous, healthy enough to plan 10 years of covenant terms, to leave notes, to anticipate court fights, to design protections. She forwarded the message to Andre and Simone, then called her security head. "Pull every record," she said, "every report, every camera, every timeline." Her security head hesitated. "Ma'am, are you saying you think—" Zuri cut in softly. "I'm saying I don't ignore doors that aren't fully closed." Then she looked at Gideon's photo on her desk and whispered, "Is there something I don't know?" The silence felt like a door that wasn't fully shut, and that right there is where the story leaves you with something to hold. Because the Harrows might be losing money and reputation, but desperation makes people dangerous. Now tell me this in the comments, because I really want your take. Would you have released the sealed appendix the moment they challenged you, or would you have tried to keep the peace until you were forced? Because this story was never really about a woman marrying a billionaire. That's just the headline people use to avoid the real message. This story is about what happens when someone the world tried to erase refuses to stay erased. It's about love as responsibility. It's about power used as a shield, then turned into a roof. Zuri didn't win because she married well. She won because she kept showing up. She honored the covenant. She built the shelter. She funded the scholarships. And when they tried to shame her into silence, she brought truth into the light and kept building anyway. Here's the lesson to leave you with. Presence beats performance. Consistency beats titles. And when people try to shrink you with shame, remember this: you do not owe anyone a smaller version of your life just to make them comfortable. If you build something good, let it speak. If you love someone, show up. And if you survive what was meant to break you, don't apologize for living. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity is not something you earn from powerful people. It's something you protect. Until next time, keep your head up, keep your heart clean, and keep building.